Good evening and welcome to tonight's program, The Dancing Man, Peg Leg Bates, a conversation with filmmaker Dave Davidson. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the members of the local historical community who work alongside me to produce these Zoom conferences, a product of our response to the COVID pandemic. Members include the following municipal historians: Audrey Klinkenberg, Town of Saugerties, also the president of the Ulster County Genealogical Society; Gail Manny, Town of Marbletown; Joan Kelly, Town of Lloyd; Richard Hepner, Town of Woodstock; and Susan Stessen Cohen, the Town of New Paltz. The committee additionally includes Marnie Jansen, a local genealogist and vice president of the Ulster County Genealogical Society; Suzanne Hausberg, the administrator of the Ulster County Historical Society; and Susan Sprackman, the treasurer of the Ulster County Historical Society. And excuse me this evening if I have to clear my throat a lot, but this pollen season has been quite cruel to me. I would also like to acknowledge our Zoom Meister, Karen Levine, a longtime friend who makes the technical side of our conferences look easy. A couple of years ago, I mentioned to another friend, Eleanor Levy, the folklorist at Arts Mid-Hudson, that I was interested in doing some research into Clayton Peg Leg Bates. Now, I've been interested in Peg Leg Bates for a long time, and true to form, he never quite got around to it. But at the mention of the name, Eleanor's eyes lit up, and before long, she'd secured a grant from Humanities New York, and we were off and running. Tonight's program is an offshoot of this larger Peg Leg Bates project. But let me turn the screen over to Eleanor, who will tell you more about it.
Good evening. As Jeff said, my name is Eleanor Levy. I am the Folk Arts Program Manager at Arts Mid-Hudson. And when Jeff brought me this project several years ago, I was so thrilled and excited to think about how we could be involved as Arts Mid-Hudson, the Folk Arts Program, because Peg Leg Bates represents so many things about being Black in America, being a Black entertainer, during Jim Crow and civil rights, and being an entrepreneur and a civic-minded person. And I was able to, as he said, I was able to secure funding from New York Humanities as part of the COVID recovery funds from the federal government. And they're very excited about the project. And it has grown a bit. At first, we were looking at mostly the historical portion, but I had the great luck as part of the Humanities Grant to be able to hire a summer intern, Joe Johnson, who's on here tonight. He is an ethnomusicology graduate student at Indiana University Bloomington, and he's brought the musical side to this because we really didn't understand what an impact Peg Leg Bates had on percussive foot movement and tap dance. So we're very excited to be adding in that portion as well. I encourage you, if you have any stories about Peg Leg Bates, to please contact me, ELEVY at artsmidhudson.org, or put something in the chat, because we would love to sit down and talk with you. Also, if you have a chance to put in the chat just where you heard about this particular event tonight, because that would be interesting to us as well, about how far out it went. And we'll be very excited to bring more public events in the coming months related to Peg Leg Bates. And we have in mind in 2023 to perhaps do a tap dance extravaganza concert. So keep posted.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. The advent of, to sort of set the stage first, the advent of steam travel on the Hudson River by the 1820s made accessible the Hudson River Valley as a destination for vacations. Seen as Americans' answer to the Rhine for scenic beauty, the valley became the birthplace of Romanticism in American arts and letters, with the Hudson River School of Painters, exemplified by artists such as Thomas Cole, Asher B. Durand, and Frederick Church. In literature, with Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, William Cullen Bryant, George Pope Morris, and Nathaniel P. Willis, and American landscape architecture with Andrew Jackson Downing of Newburgh, who brought Calvert Vaux over from England, who in turn partnered with Frederick Law Olmsted in many projects, including Central Park, after Downing's untimely passing in a steamboat accident. The proliferation of private villas and grand hotels catering to New York City Protestant elite and international travelers soon dotted the landscape, with clusters of smaller resorts and mountain houses in the region for the less well-off among the dominant culture. With the coming of the railroads, development extended further west into the mountains, also with the same cultural restrictions. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Jewish immigrants began to move into the Catskills to escape tenement life and bought farms, converting their farmhouses into rooming houses for summer guests to help make ends meet. By the 1920s, some of these rooming houses began to expand into more elaborate resorts. By the 1920s, Hispanic, Irish, and Italian resorts began springing up as well throughout Ulster and its adjacent counties, following a similar pattern to Jewish immigrants. Farms became rooming houses to bungalow colonies and finally to resorts. And I see Ish Martinez is one of the guests, and Ish will be talking about Las Villas of Plattekill in Ulster County on June 22nd. So look for that announcement. So this evening's program will be co-moderated by Rennie Scott Childress, Assistant Professor of History at SUNY New Paltz. Good evening, Rennie. And thanks for agreeing to be a part of this program. Tonight's distinguished guest is Davidson. First, congratulations, Dave, on your recent awards. The Harlem Spotlight Award and at the Harlem International Film Festival for the best film highlighting Harlem's history and culture for the film Cinema and Sanctuary, Hans Richter and America's first documentary film school. And for the best documentary at the Utah Dance Festival for the film we're going to be talking about this evening, The Dancing Man, Pegleg Bates. So for over 37 years, Dave has been making award-winning documentary on the arts, culture, and social issues through Hudson West Productions, many in partnership with Amber Edwards. Dave's awards and honors include an AFI Independent Filmmakers Grant, NEA Artworks Grants, Emmy Awards, the NEA Mid-Atlantic Artist Fellowship, the NEH Pioneer of the Arts from the Black Experimental Theater, an Outstanding Artist Award from the New Jersey Arts Council, as well as numerous awards at international film festivals. He founded the Hudson West Productions in 1985 and currently serves as the president. He is also professor emeritus at City College of New York, part of the CUNY system, where he was the founding director of the MFA program in film production, the first of its kind at an affordable public university. Ureni and I will be asking Dave questions throughout tonight's program. There will be time for questions from the floor at the end of the presentation. We ask you to put your questions in the chat as they occur to you. Susan Sprackman will be monitoring the chat and coordinating the Q&A at the end. I will let her describe the procedures. Susan?
Okay. Yeah, hi everybody. Yeah, we'd like you to put your questions in the chat. I'll sort of aggregate them so that similar questions are asked together. And you know, where possible, I may combine the questions, and so they won't be asked exactly as you've written them. And we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. So.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Okay, so we will now begin this evening's program, and I would like to ask Dave what first attracted him to Clayton Pegleg Bates.
Well, first of all, thanks for the introduction, Jeff. It's great to be here. Nice to see everybody, and it's going to be a fun evening. I think we need to roll back to 1985. I had just finished my first long-form documentary with Hudson West Productions called Sissy Houston, Sweet Inspiration. And I was on the circuit with that. It was on PBS nationally as a Black History Month special. And I met my current filmmaking partner and Hudson West partner, Amber Edwards, at a screening because she was working for New Jersey Network and made a small piece about gospel singing in Newark, New Jersey. And of course, Sissy Houston, Sweet Inspiration is about the person who later became known as Whitney's mother. But when we did our film, Whitney was just a 14-year-old kid who had a great set of pipes singing in the choir at New Hope Baptist Church. But anyway, Amber and I found that we had very similar interests and decided to go in search of a project. And Amber had previously worked at a TV station whose viewing area included the Catskills. I don't remember the name of the town or the call letters, but I do remember the slogan, which was, if it's news to us, which I thought was pretty interesting for a TV station. Anyway, she had done a short piece on this guy named Pegleg Bates, who was a tap dancer with one leg and an entrepreneur in the Catskill Mountains, and was just an international television star as well. And I said, when do we start? It was just a no-brainer. It had all the elements of a great story. There's always a lot of detective work trying to string that story together, but there was no waiting. I mean, one of the things that Hudson West was founded on was cultural retrieval. And we had a sense that even in, like, by the time we started the project in '87, that the Pegleg Bates Resort might be in jeopardy. And so this whole tradition might be endangered in terms of falling off sort of the cultural table. So we wanted to get to it. And we went up and started doing oral history interviews with Pegleg Bates. He was absolutely engaging and a great raconteur, but all I really needed to know was the outline. Son of a sharecropper in the Jim Crow South, lost his leg when he was 12 years old, and becomes an international star and Catskill resort owner. You know, end of story, or beginning of story, if you will. But that's what launched us on what, you know, became a fairly lengthy project. When you start with a good idea and no money, we had to do a lot of fundraising, but immediately started establishing that relationship with Pegleg Bates and day by day, interview by interview, this wonderful narrative unfolded. And I think what makes good documentary work is when you have a strong character like Peg Leg Bates, who has a very important personal story to tell, but that story resonates with a history of larger issues. And his rise as an entertainer and as a Black entrepreneur and as somebody who overcame a handicap had all of those elements and touches all of those issues. They're still very important today.
Great, thank you. Now I understand that you brought a few clips to share, so why don't we look at the first one now from the film?
Okay.
In life, you don't let anything stop you. If you want to do it bad enough, you get knocked down, pushed around, you fall down, you get up, say, I want to do this, and by God, I'm going to do it. And by golly, eventually you will. And that was always been my determination.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is now showtime at the Peg Leg Bates Country Club, presenting the Peg Leg Bates Country Club Show. And now, here's your host, Peg Leg Bates.
Do you folks mind if I introduce myself to you? I am the fastest dancing man in town. Just give me a half a chance, and I'll prove that this is true when I swing this peg leg all around. Folks, my name is Clayton. Peg Leg Bates to you. I am always syncopating and doing something new. When I start to sing it, music fills the air. But when I start to swing it, you'll think that I am Fred Astaire.
Black people weren't on Ed Sullivan every week. In those days, it was tough for black people to feel good about themselves in those kinds of ways, to be able to see ourselves on TV like that, to be able to know that Peg Leg Bates was coming on the Ed Sullivan Show tomorrow night was a big thing, and there was no missing it.
As a young black person, two things that were really important at that time. Peg Leg Bates was going to be on Ed Sullivan, and Joe Louis was going to fight.
There were a lot of dancers crippled in some respect, but Peg was outstanding because he was a fine, fine rhythm dancer. Most of them, Big Time Crip and Jesse James and others, they did great dancing, but it was more rhythmic, it was more leg or mania than real rhythm tap dancing. And Peg was a great rhythm tap dancer, no question about it. And his exit alone would have stopped the show.
He was reaching for things and trying things and accomplishing things and pushing himself so that he would be a real tap dancer. And he would be respected on the same level as somebody like Bunny Briggs or Teddy Hale. And he was. Peg Leg Bates, You know, Peg Leg Bates was a tap dancer on level with all those people.
At every show he did, he stopped. Bang! Just like stopped every show. Amazing, you know. Stop every show you ever in, you know.
Okay, thanks. So that clip actually is the first part of the film, and I was curious. It opens with Peg Leg Bates speaking to a young man about not letting anything in life stop him, and includes a section where Mr. Bates describes himself with poetic flair. Why did you choose to begin the film with these two segments?
Well, in the opening scene, you really see Peg Leg Bates in his element later in life. His dancing career was well behind him at this point, and he was sort of an eminence grise of show business and tap dancing, and an elder in the African-American entertainment business. So he really saw himself as a role model. And so talking to these young Black gentlemen, he's really imparting his philosophy of life. And if we left it hanging out there just as that, it might sound a little empty and maybe cliched, but quickly we jump into filling in the spaces that shows how Peg Leg Bates applied that philosophy every day and really earned that special place in culture that he eventually achieved. But you see the nightclub, which was Peg Leg Bates Resort Evening, whereas later in some later clips we'll see what happens in the grounds during the day. So to the poetry, I guess there should have been a little bit of a spoiler alert, but actually the lines that he recites there are actually from that song. If people tuned in early enough to see the slide, it was a song that was his signature piece, which also told about his life and achievements and prowess as not a novelty act, but a dancer on par with everyone. And one of the reasons we wanted that up front also is like, here's a guy who's totally self-realized. He knows who he is. He knows he's a legend. He's not afraid to talk about it, and is proud of all of his accomplishments. And you just feel that coming from him. So those were our two leads, and we took it off from there.
Okay, great. Yes, I love the description that here's one of my senior moments. Why am I blocking on his name? The one who describes his accomplishments, what he did as part of that clip. I don't know.
Gregory Hines?
Gregory Hines, yes.
He was the first, yeah, he's the first commentator.
Yeah.
I mean, it was important when we were making this film. We didn't exactly know. We knew of his prowess in the African-American community, and people who were old enough to have watched the Ed Sullivan Show, where when the show finished its run, he held the record for number of appearances. He appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show 26 times. So to elevate him and show what his impact as a star, when Gregory Hines says there was just no missing him. You had to watch him on your TV. And when Ruth Brown compares him to Joe Louis, two things: Peg Leg Bates was going to be on Ed Sullivan, and Joe Louis was going to fight. Period. Full stop. So we felt it was incumbent on us to really show how important this guy was to people who may not have known about him. And ultimately, I don't think we mentioned that in 1992, when we finally finished the film, it was headed to a PBS national release. So we felt a responsibility first to get him set. This is who this guy is. And I think the dance clip speaks for itself, but those little commentaries help round it out.
Yeah. Okay.
This is, oops.
I think that Rennie,
Yeah.
you had a couple of questions to add too.
Yes, just real quick. Dave, I'm wondering, we've mentioned now Ed Sullivan several times, and his show was really immensely important. I'm wondering if you just could say a word about how important that show was in American culture in general.
Yeah, it really feels like a time long ago on a planet far away, that there was a time when television really had 3 major networks, at times 4, but that American culture was tuned in that evening of the week to watch a variety show, which was hosted by Ed Sullivan, who was kind of a Broadway producer and put together a lot of acts. But this was the variety show that showed America what was going on. A lot of it was going on in New York, and he just brought people in from Broadway theaters. They did their thing, but it was a showcase for so many talented people, but particularly a lot of African Americans, including Peg Leg Bates, got their break on the Sullivan Show. But in this diverse kind of watered down media environment that we have now, we don't have those central cultural moments that we had. So there's really nothing to compare with the impact that the Ed Sullivan Show had on American viewers, and directly from that, the impact that Peg Leg Bates had.
And then I'm wondering too, you have 2 key people as talking heads there, Gregory Hines and Ruth Brown. And for folks in the audience who may not be familiar with them, I'm just wondering if you could let us know why it was so important in the 1990s for you to have them speaking about Peg Leg Bates's legacy.
Well, Honey Coles was one of the most respected, sophisticated tap dancers. I mean, he was a name that was known, even though he too was an elder statesman by that time. Ruth Brown was an incredible R&B singer. And at the time we were in production, there was a Broadway show called Black and Blue that she was starring in. So even though her career stretched back to the 1940s, she was very, current. People knew of her in the moment, and her career continued at that time. So those were 2 really important talking heads as well.
Great, thanks. So I believe we're going to move on to clip 2. Is there anything you want to say to set that up for us?
I think here we're gonna move into, as the first segment sort of showed, evening nightlife, which was a huge draw for Peg Leg Bates, especially up in the Catskills. People wanted a little glitz. They wanted lots of sophisticated urban entertainment, and he delivered that. But during the day, it was in the mold of a lot of other resorts, in that these were urban people who were getting out of the city. And so you'll see the daytime situation there, and we'll get into a little history of the resort and its importance for Black culture.
Days of the past, entertainers made money, and many of them disappeared broke. And then they were on soup lines, or they died in old folks' homes, but not Peg Leg Bates. Peg Leg Bates was a man who, while performing, decided, I am going to be independent. And so he bought and built a resort. Peg Leg Bates, a most unusual man.
How are you? Got sugar for me? Okay. Thank you very much.
Right, see you there.
I'll stand by and take you over to the picnic area. One day I was playing Girl Singers. Oh, this was in 1950, I guess. And I had my brother-in-law with me. And I said to him, hey, Bubba, look out there in the swimming pool, tennis court. How many black people do you see out there? He said, I don't see no black people out there, Peg. You know black people can't come here. I said, that's just the point. Wouldn't it be nice, Bubba, if black people also had a nice place to come to, just like this, just like any other race of people? Bubba said, yes, it would be nice, Peg, but it's far-fetched. It'll never happen. Welcome back to the Peg Leg Bates Resort. Told me last year you was coming back. And I sure do thank you for keeping your promise. And while I have got your attention, in the back of me is the sports area. You'll find volleyball, ping pong, 2 basketball courts. You'll find barbecue pits where you can cook out. You can also look, the cool pool is right over there. The main thing is enjoy yourself, have a good time, and just say to yourself, I've been up to Peg Leg Bates, and by golly, I had myself a ball. So until I'll see you later, enjoy yourself, and God bless you. Thank you very much.
To fully appreciate the impact of Peg Leg Bates economically and socially is to understand that here was a man in a period of segregation, abject segregation. Blacks had to travel separately, traveled in the back of buses and on the front of trains where the smoke came in. Blacks had no rights that anybody was obliged to respect. And there were no resorts. There were approximately 10 in the entire United States.
Normally, we'd go to town like Omaha or some town that didn't have a black hotel. You would stay with a family. You'd make this frenzied dash when the train pulled into the station. Everybody would dash in different directions trying to get to this rooming house and get a room.
We used to have a green book. That was a book that had all of the addresses of restaurants that would serve black people, or would let you eat a sandwich inside and not hand it to you through the back door. We had addresses of all the colored inns. One might say that Peg Leg Bates had an oasis. And it might be best described as an oasis to which blacks could go.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. The reality of the Peg Leg Bates Resort, that it was located far from beautiful downtown Kerhonkson, as stated in the ad that we included. And I think that we've privately talked about the place of irony in Black culture. But it was located in the rural hamlet of Sampsonville on property that had previously been a turkey farm. Now I know that this area had a cultural mix and a history of that was not exactly open to multiculturalism. And I was wondering if in the time that you spent at the resort, speaking to Peg Leg, if you became aware in any way of the community's feelings about the resort, one way or the other, or the man himself.
Well, because the Peg Leg Bates Resort was such a world unto itself, and there was so much going on there, that when we were in Sampsonville or near Sampsonville, we were completely absorbed in shooting within the resort. You know, we had limited time, so we came there and actually, you know, stayed there, and you know, we're kind of part of the scene for the days that we were shooting. So we really didn't venture out that much into the community. I do know, though, that I think it's a reflection of Peg Leg Bates and his approach to life and his approach to integration and wanting to live together, that, you know, he was really considered a prominent local businessman. And because of that, he was held in some esteem in the community. He did a lot with the community in terms of charity work, and he did local appearances and things like that. I believe that it was the Lions Club or the Rotary Club did lunches at his resort. So certainly these were mixed groups, and he would take guests into Sampsonville, to the Sampsonville United Church. I think he was the president of the board there. So this was a man who took the approach of, I'm gonna win these people over. I'm gonna show them that that this place is terrific, that I'm somebody you can work with, and I think it worked for him. And you know, he was by nature a very savvy politician and had to be throughout his entire life to be able to negotiate against the odds that he needed to negotiate to get where he got. So I think whatever, if anything happened in Sampsonville, I think he was able to deal with it.
Thanks. I know too that I saw him perform at the Ronda Valley High School auditorium, where I believe I saw him once, but I think several times he performed there to raise money for summer programs for kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was, you know, there were some blacks in the district, but it was a predominantly white rural school district, and
Mm-hmm.
it's well received there too. So
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. I think that Rennie, you have some questions too?
Yeah, so Dave, Percy Sutton uses the metaphor of an oasis to refer to the resort. And I'm wondering if you could help us understand a little bit why that was such an important concept in the context that you just laid out for us.
Sure. Well, first, let me say a word about Percy Sutton, because I didn't before. And at that time, he was, I think, the president of the not-for-profit corporation that was keeping the Apollo Theater alive. So if you talk about iconic Black institutions in Harlem, the Apollo Theater pretty much tops the list. He also was the Manhattan Borough president. So he was an important person to be able to give a larger cultural perspective to the project and the resort in its time. So, in the 50s and the early 60s, Sutton mentions the Green Book. It was still there, which means that discrimination was still there. And Peg Leg Bates, who was a megastar and was allowed to play white resorts in the Catskills, still had to eat in the kitchen. So you can imagine a working class or middle class African-American driving up from Harlem and going to the front desk of one of those hotels and asking for a room. So the idea of the Peg Leg Bates Resort being there, being a safe haven, and you could see those signs to the Peg Leg Bates Resort for 15 miles, and that was a very reassuring thing because that oasis was just a few turns in the road away.
Then in terms of the audience, we got to see some good shots of folks who were visiting. Were most of those folks, as far as you know, how many people actually would be there at any particular time? And were the majority of them, as far as you know, coming up from New York City, or did he have a wider audience than that?
Well, there is that division between the night crowd and the day crowd. People who were coming up for picnicking were mostly coming up on buses, mostly from New York City, predominantly Harlem, but he would advertise heavily in the Harlem Black newspapers. So you had a lot of traffic coming up from there. But interestingly, I think because of his reach as a cultural icon, they also took out ads in Black newspapers in Baltimore and Pittsburgh. So you could easily say there was a larger draw in terms of the African-American population. But the nighttime and daytime cleave was very interesting because it was a cool nightclub. And I think a lot of white residents, whereas they might not stay in his rooms, didn't need to if they were local. They came to drink in the bar, they came to see the show, and it was a lot of fun. So it was a mixed crowd, but I think also, when you put that together with people who might have been staying at the resort, or if it was an early show, day trippers would be able to stay for that show. It was more African-American than it was Caucasian.
Great. So I believe you've got one more clip. Is there anything you need to tell us to set this one up?
Well, I think we're kind of following the curve of the lifespan of the resort. And when we started shooting in 1989, even though the film wasn't done till 1992, we were there for really the last gasp with Peg Leg Bates in charge. So what we're going to see is really the last night. It's a celebration where his old buddies who are tap dancers from New York come up and put on a show for him. He was long past his own dancing years, but it's a real bittersweet celebration, which is marking the last night of the Peg Leg Bates Resort as they knew it.
Great thing about integration is obvious. But the sad aspect of those things has been the passing of a resort like the Peg Leg Bates Resort, a place where Black people knew that they could go and it was theirs. Once integration came, we began to go to different resorts and experience that, and that was good, but it was a sad passing for some place that was so special and unique and there for us as the Peg Leg Bates Resort.
So easy when you know how. But it takes so long to learn.
Walked the grounds too many days and too many nights. Shook too many hands and smiled at too many people. It's like a ghost that's in a building. No matter who takes it over, They should be glad to be able to say, this was Peg Leg Bates's place.
So before we get to the first question, I do want to give Gregory Hines his complete due, because all of the people who spoke in the film, to our minds, were really legendary. But Gregory Hines in 1991, I think, when we interviewed him, was so in the moment. I mean, he was the most famous, most celebrated tap dancer in the world at that time. Plus he was a movie star, plus he was a choreographer, plus he was in TV series. So he really meant, he was the embodiment. I think he and kind of Gregory Hines, and I think passing the baton a little bit to Savion Glover in those years, was really as high as you could get on that ladder. So of course we said, he'll never agree to be in this movie. He's too far up there. He's too busy. And all we had to do when we finally got him on the phone was mention Peg Leg Bates. And he not only appeared in the film and was super generous with that, but he also helped us with fundraising when we were trying to get together on PBS. Hi, Rufus.
Got behind you.
My dachshund. So I just wanted to say that, but I'm sure you have a question.
Yeah. So Gregory Hines mentioned something about sort of the larger significance of the passing of the resort. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if there's a real irony there that the passing of the resort was a sign of social and economic progress. He talked about it in terms of loss, mm-hmm. but I'm wondering if there's some element of positivity that we might draw out of that.
But there is an element of positivity, because he said, you know, we could go to other resorts and that was good. So I think he even sets up the fact that there's an irony, there's gain and there's loss in this situation. And, you know, the demise of the Peg Leg Bates Resort was very much part of the tide of the Catskills in general. There was no question that the Catskill scene was waning, you know, we're talking about, you know, through the 70s, maybe into the 80s, that, you know, suburbanization, the rise of the middle class, including the Black middle class, where people they had their own backyards. You know, they weren't living in tenement buildings in Harlem. Some of those backyards had pools. Air travel was cheap. You had affordable national hotel chains. So people were out and about. And of course, with African-American people, integration gave them more choices. All of these other things that I just mentioned kind of applied to everybody. You know, they just had more choices. And the Catskill resorts seemed kind of quaint and maybe, you know, not as exciting as some of these other opportunities. You know, go to the Catskills or fly to Europe, you figure it out, right? So, you know, African Americans were, you know, going other places. You could fly to Bermuda. You could, you know, you could do all this kind of stuff. But in terms of the institutions themselves, in terms of the resorts, the Black resorts got hit the hardest because they were the most stretched. Integration, as I just said, gave Black people more choices, but the Black resorts were really mom and pop enterprises, and they couldn't compete with the bigger white-owned hotels that, you know, they had year-round facilities, a lot of them, and the Black resorts really could only afford to stay open seasonally and do summer traffic, you know, I guess, you know, Memorial Day to Labor Day. And since they were family operations, which the Peg Leg Bates Resort certainly was, kids didn't want to take them over. You know, as the parents aged, there was that going on. And as interest started to decline, they took what money they had and borrowed what money they could to put in more facilities, you know, to try and continue to attract folks from the city to these African-American based resorts. So I saw a statistic that in 1960, there were 20 Black resorts that were advertising in the Amsterdam News regularly. And by 1970, that was cut in half. There were only 10. But the three major Black resorts, one of which was the Peg Leg Bates Resort. There was the King's Lodge in Otisville and Paradise Farm in Cuttaville. They were bigger, they were more powerful, they had more stuff, and they actually hung on, and Peg Leg Bates hung on the longest. Why? Because they had Peg Leg Bates. He was the draw, and he remained the draw. And it could be that as we moved into the 70s, that group of people who knew and loved and admired him, seeing him on Ed Sullivan or seeing him dance anywhere, they were starting to fade, but he still had enough of a draw that he could keep it going. But it really shifted from overnight folks and weekly folks taking their full vacations there to groups coming up on buses mostly for the day. So he hung on the longest, but Paradise Farm, I think, was sold in 84. And as you know, we were shooting there in 89, he was in the process at that point of leasing, I think, with option to buy to an immigrant couple from Jamaica, Lloyd and Doreen Simmons. And I think within a year of that, they actually took full ownership of the place. And just as an interesting footnote, because their spin was to reach out to the next sort of up and coming immigrant group was people from the Caribbean. So they gave the cuisine a Caribbean flair. The entertainment was slanted towards Caribbean stuff. And so in a way that hurt the old clientele who were more connected to the Peg Leg Bates scene. So that, there was a little bit of competition in focus there, but so by 1990, the Simmons had it outright, or at least the mortgage was in their name. But the Peg Leg Bates era itself was over by that time.
I remember when we were looking for a house up here in 2005, we stayed at Williams Lake for a night or two over here by the Binnewaters, and it felt then like walking into history. And I think it closed down like the year after that. So Catskills definitely were on a demise. Jeff?
Yeah, I think all of my questions have been answered. To just a reflection is the importance of really in a larger culture where you have to look over your shoulder all of the time, to have a place like the Peg Leg Bates Resort, or even the Catskill hotels for the Jewish people, or the Villa Zaplatkill for the Hispanics, that it was special. It was a place where you could let your hair down and just be yourself for a few days, and that was, I think, that the civil rights gains of the 60s were, had that double-edged thing, not only for the Black culture, but for Jews who now could stay in any hotel, for the Latinos who could stay in any hotel, for all of the cultures, the Irish in Durham, that it was that kind of moment. I don't know if you have any comments about that, or.
It's really tough because, Black artistic endeavor across the board, especially in music and dance in the United States, is really embraced as our culture. It's American music. Jazz is referred to as America's classical music. And there is that tightrope of, wanting to preserve the source, the inspiration from which that sprung. But a lot of where that inspiration sprung from was out of, pain and deprivation. So, as economics and racial justice improved, at least for a time, that you have to leaven one with the other. It's complicated. I mean, we do still have historically Black colleges, which allow white students, but retain the essence of what made them so valuable to the community. Obviously, African American churches are still a powerhouse in the community, but it's a tough and almost unanswerable question, except that I think that there is, there's such a life force in the African American community to try and preserve, the essence of what was best about these things, so they not be lost completely.
Okay, great. I want to thank you, and I know there are a lot of questions from the floor because I've been seeing them flash in front of us. So I'm going to turn the program over to Susan, who has been monitoring them. And Susan?
Yeah, we basically have 4 types of questions. And the first one was asked in different ways. How did Peg Leg go from being a boy who lost his legs to becoming a dancer? And related to that, was he professionally trained or was he self-taught?
Well, this is a great segue to plug anybody who asked the question to be sure and keep your eyes open for the screening of the full film, which will be happening sometime in September in the Hudson Valley. So all questions will be answered, but I'm not going to make you wait. I'll give you an answer now. First of all, Peg Leg Bates started dancing when he was 5 years old. He danced on the street before his accident. So he was self-taught and got spare change dancing in front of the barbershop. And amazingly, when he suffered the accident, he couldn't wait to get back out on the street and dance again. And so there is the first instance of the grit and fortitude of Peg Leg Bates, that he, completely adapted to his new circumstance and started dancing on the street again, and was out on the road by the time he was a young teenager.
Okay. Another question was, did he always dance solo or did he sometimes have partners?
He always danced solo as far as I know, but in a lot of these reviews where he headlined, he would have, a chorus around him. You'll see in the full film. Unfortunately, we didn't have a clip of that. There's a line of chorus girls behind him. There are musicians, so he's not on stage alone. The only time I've seen him dance with another person was his final appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, which I think might have been 1966. So he was born in 2007, so figure out how old he was. He danced with another dancer by the name of Little Buck, and they do this tremendous acrobatic duet, which looks like it's completely improvised, but it's jaw-droppingly fun to watch. But I think that was just a one-off. That was something they did for the Sullivan Show, but it was never Peg Leg Bates and in terms of an act.
Okay, the next 2 questions relate to the resort. And did he use his showbiz connections to lure other talent up to the resort?
Definitely. I think he had his house band, and I think he worked with local folks. I think Renee Bailey was a singer at the club, and she lived in the area. But oh yeah, he would pull folks up. Now, I saw one snapshot of Louis Armstrong at the resort. No horn was in sight. He was just sitting in a folding chair by the pool. But how could Louis Armstrong not be at the Peg Leg Bates Resort? How could he be there and not play that evening? But in a lot of ways, you know, Black showbiz folks did it to get away. But I think there was probably the irresistible urge to just jump on stage, especially if some of your friends from the city were there. I think it was just a natural thing. So he did lure people up. And I don't think that, you know, that last evening that we shot with all the tap dancers coming up, I don't think that was that unusual.
Okay, so after the resort closed, can you talk a little bit about what happened to the property?
You know, it's sad to say, I don't have a full timeline. I do know I went up and visited the Simmonses one time, and it was alive. That's all I can say. I went during the day. I didn't see any guests. I honestly don't know. There may be some people out there watching who were involved, you know, either in the entertainment. But I think Doreen passed away in Jamaica. I'm not really sure, but I don't know when they let it go. But I think that the people who purchased it recently, I think, are converting it into a horse farm. But I don't know. There's a large gap there that I'm really unfamiliar with. So I don't know if it was vacant. But honestly, I bet there's some people in the who are viewing tonight who might actually have more cogent answers than I do.
So if you have an answer, please send it in. And the last question is whether the film, and I'm assuming this means the original films, are getting cleaned up and restored after all these years.
The films of him dancing?
Yeah, I guess, Henry, is that what you were referring to?
Well,
let's assume yes.
if you're talking about the black and white footage of his dancing.
Yeah, that's what Henry was referring to.
Okay, well, many of those were actually done from kinescopes, which are, you know, back in the days before they had videotape, all TV was live. So the only way they could document it was actually to put a 16 millimeter film camera next to a TV screen and actually shoot it off the screen. So the original quality of these clips is pretty questionable. But in terms of scratches and dust and all that kind of stuff, you know, there are grants to be gotten for restoring all kinds of things. I don't know of an initiative specifically to restore tap dance films or Peg Leg Bates clips in particular, but it should be done.
And I just wanted to call people's attention in the chat. Mrs. Martin put in a link to a HTTPS abandonedhudsonvalley.com singing the Borscht Belt Blues. Sounds like an interesting thing to watch. And those were the questions.
Well, I would, I know Ellen is probably going to tag this with other events around the whole Peg Leg Bates initiative, but I'm definitely on board for what will be a screening of the full film, because what's lacking in these clips is I think that the immense impact of hearing this man articulate his own personal story, especially through the Jim Crow years and what he had to go through to do to achieve the things that he achieved. It's in the film. It's great to hear it from the origin. So I'd encourage people to stay in touch with the project, and I look forward to seeing you at the screening.
Okay, somebody wanted to know if they could ask a question directly. Karen and Stephen. Can you unmute or
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Hello, great presentation. But this is little Henry here, by the way, 2 months old, who enjoyed it also. Even if he doesn't
shout out to Henry.
Thank you. Great, love, can't wait to see the whole thing. I happen to be a local filmmaker and historian of documentaries, and I'm just so glad that you were able to get this when you did, when he was still around, and
Hi, Henry.
all the people you got in there were just so great that you captured that. I just wanted to mention 2 things, if you could corroborate. Well, 3 things. Is one, that the people that I've spoken to that remember him, one, that he was obviously such a sweetheart, which comes across in the footage,
Mm-hmm.
and then just 2 pieces of philosophy that I remember, because I also have a big concentration in Black American history for many decades, so it's one of my specialties, and I'm just thrilled again that you did this. Is that one, when he lost his leg, that he actually said later that it was the best thing that happened to him because it had set him apart and really made him not just another dancer, one aspect of his philosophy. And then also, is it true that when he once said that, I hope one day that there won't be a need for a resort like mine, which has a focus only on the African-American community, even though as we said, there's a mixed, bittersweet of all the Black businesses that closed, once integration was fully set.
I have a feeling when he was talking about someday not having to be a resort like his, I think he might have been talking about his resort, that his resort would morph into this place that was, completely integrated situation where there weren't the kind of divisions that sadly, there were and still are in some areas. But at risk of spoiler alert, I'll go ahead and tell you to his notion that he was glad he lost the leg because it made him unique. He was touring with I think it might have been Blackbirds was the review, but he was touring in Europe, and he invited his mother to come up from South Carolina and meet him in New York at the docks when he got off. And he was going to surprise her because he got an artificial leg. And he walked down the gangplank and walked right by her, and she did not recognize him. And he said, that's it. That was the last time he ever wore an artificial leg, because the peg itself was his identity. Look forward to seeing you at the screening.
Thank you for that anecdote. We look forward to September.
Terrific.
Thanks again. Okay.
See you there.
And those are the only questions that we have. That was fascinating. Thank you so much.
If I could just take a moment. This is
Sure.
Eleanor.
Karen and Henry.
I am looking to do the screening around September 17th, which is National Dance Day. So I think it would be appropriate to do it somewhere in that time frame. Also, I am going to put we do have a Facebook page, because of course we have a Facebook page. So if you didn't get to put something in the chat, then please, go to the Facebook page, and you can converse with me there if you want to be interviewed, if you have a story about Peg Leg Bates, or you want to keep up on the project. We will be at Juneteenth on Pine Street. If you want to come by, Jeff and I will be there to chat with people about the Peg Leg Bates project. And we'll probably be at some other events during the summer as well. And we look forward to hearing everything you have to tell us. I will tell you that Jeff and Dave Winograd and I did make a pilgrimage to the resort a couple of weeks ago. We did not go on the property because it's privately owned. And sadly, we could see that the nightclub was gone and the pool was gone, but much of the other buildings are still standing. But there's really no signifier that it's Peg Leg Bates Resort. One of the other things that'll be happening with the project is we will be working with the Pomeroy Foundation to make sure that there is a historic street sign put up at the resort so that when people drive by, they'll absolutely know that it was there.
So before we go, I just want to say one more thing, and that is how grateful and humbled we are that after 30 years that the film and Peg Leg Bates and his story still resonate with audiences. That's why we make them, to know that there's still interest in this kind of history, this amazing artist and iconic figure, is just so gratifying that I'm really happy to be associated with this project. So thank you guys.
And Dave, I really have to say that the way you described Gregory Hines and approaching him and thinking that he'd never do it is the way I feel about you in this project, and and being willing to come here this evening. I'm very thankful for that, and I look forward to continuing to work with you on this project, and to the full screening. And I also want to just remind people, while they're still on, that on the 22nd of June, we will have Ish Martinez talking about Las Villas of Plattekill in Ulster County. And I look forward to what the rest of the Peg Leg Bates project has to bring to the community. So thanks again.
Thank you all.
Okay. Take care. And thanks, Rennie.
Mind if I introduce myself to you? Well, I'm the fastest dancing man in town. Just give me a half a chance and I shall prove that this is true. When I swing this pig leg all around, I have only one leg to you, but to me it is good as two. Folks, my name is Clayton, Peg Leg Bates to you. I am always syncopating and doing something new. When I start to sing it, music fills the air. But when I start to swing it, you will think that I am Fred Astaire. Now, you'd say it's hard to dance with this deformity. Just give me a half a chance and I'll prove this peg is TNT. Now I'll take position and I shall commence. With your kind permission, I'm going into a dance.